What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new edition of the Rock Fantasy Files. Your boys hosting tonight. Steven unfortunately couldn't be with us. He was once again arrested for exposing himself at the Maryland Death Fest. So, yeah, we got to get a GoFundMe going for him because he keeps getting arrested. I mean, I got to send him bail money. So, last minute, we had to change a topic, and Count Ralphus came through, with a fucking home run, if I do say so myself. We are going to discuss I Knew I Was a Metalhead When, and then we're going to talk about the events that turned us into fucking metalheads. Whether it's the first songs you heard, the first albums you bought, magazines you read when you were a kid, posters you bought and put on your walls. How about me and fucking Ovi and Kristian are around the same age? How about the first like MTV music videos you ever saw? Shit like that. So we're gonna go around in a circle jerk and talk about when we became metalheads. Um, I probably should have asked the panel what we wanted to do first. I guess should we start with like songs and albums and then we'll go to
How
concerts
about,
and magazines and shit like that?
well, formative years? What led to it?
Formative
I
years?
think it should go from the beginning, like the very beginning of just like
Yeah.
the first things that got you into music, whether it's metal
Yeah.
or whatever.
hmm
Okay. So, Count Ralphus, being that this is your idea and your episode pretty much, how about you kick us off, my man?
All right. So when I was a little kid, my parents didn't have like a ton of albums in the house, but they had like a little record collection. My parents had like some Johnny Cash and stuff like that. A lot of my dad liked a lot of like the 50s doo-wop kind of bands and stuff like that. He was big into like the old 50s music. That's the era they grew up in and stuff. And my mom grew up in England, in Liverpool, England.
Oh shit.
And so I always had Beatles albums in my house when I was a little kid. So the the very first things I remember hearing as far as like a rock and roll band was the Beatles. And my brother, who's a couple years older than me, not a huge music fan, but when he was in the 70s, he got the little 8-track, portable 8-track player. And I think Tony still has his like today,
Yep.
the same kind of thing. But he uh he had a stack of Beatles 8-tracks that my mom would just kept buying them. And my mom bought us a lot of the early Beatles. She didn't like the druggy Beatles. She liked the Help and all the early Meet the Beatles and stuff like that. So we had all of those early ones. And then my brother even had like a few Rolling Stones ones because the other kids in the neighborhood were listening to the Stones. I remember a Queen. It was like I don't know if it was a best of, but it was like I remember it was had We Are the Champions and everything, the News of the World. I ended up getting it on vinyl later, but it was like I remember like a handful of stuff like that was being played in my house, and it was kind of like our collection of 8-tracks. I had a Kiss double platinum on 8-track. I still have that. But the first time my parents ever like bought an album that was like for me, and it was I don't have the actual album now, but it was like a 7-inch or 45 of it, but it was of the Monster Mash, and
Nice.
that's
Awesome.
Bobby
Yeah.
Bobby Boris Pickett and the Crypt Kickers. And
Huh.
this is like a cool one that I got years later, and this is another really cool one that I got. It's the Monster Mash, but with like all other Halloween songs and stuff. But this one with Bobby Pickett, it was like all like got the Transylvania twist and all that stuff on it. But yeah, that was like the first album that I kind of remember being like that was my record. But when it came time to finally like asking my parents for an album, as a little kid in the 70s, it was impossible to not be exposed to Kiss in one way or another. But in like second grade, I remember kids coming into school for show and tell with their Kiss albums, and I was just like, wow,
Yeah.
I'd be like mesmerized by them. Even at such a young age. I was comic book fan. I was a monster fan. So I love monsters. I love comic books. This band was the perfect band for me as a little kid. So I begged my parents to get me a Kiss album, and I don't even know like the names of the albums and stuff at the time. I just said, "Get me a, I need a Kiss album." So it was like Christmas time or a birthday, and my parents went out, and I guess the newest thing that just hit the shelves that was all advertised everywhere was this big double live beauty,
Nice.
Kiss Alive 2. And I mean, I would just stare at this picture. That picture of Gene Simmons, my favorite picture of Gene Simmons. I would just stare at this back of this album cover, and this became like the holy grail for me at the time. I mean, it had this amazing gatefold with the band. I remember drawing one of my earliest drawings I ever drew was like drawing this picture, his Gene blowing the fire or explosions behind them, and everybody's just rocking out. I thought this was must have been the most amazing thing you could ever see live. And it came with this like awesome booklet of them back then. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a little tour book thing. This album, the colors to it, the cover and stuff. As soon as I look at it, I get like this nostalgia feeling. And I still never got tired of listening to this my whole life. I've just gone back to this a million times. And then a couple of years later, I got this picture of me. This is at a birthday party of mine when I was a little kid. And I'm the kid holding up a fistful of dollars. So, baby, you better believe I was back in the New York groove now. Let me try to
Nice.
lay that in right here.
That's
I,
awesome.
don't- I don't know if you could see. I got, it's hard for me to
I
point out,
see
but I
Ace.
got, there's that. You
You're
can see the
holding the
Ace
Ace
Frehley.
album.
Well, somebody else is holding it, and I'm the kid in front, kind of holding up a little wad of cash.
Fistful of dollars. Yeah.
That's
It's a
awesome.
baby. And now today, the same album, the exact same album, is in a frame. I met Ace Frehley years later, got him to sign it. I got my
Wow.
3D glasses from the Psycho Circus tour, or yeah, when they did the Psycho
Yeah,
Circus tour,
Psycho
they did
Circus.
Yeah.
the 3D show, and I got it like an Ace Frehley ticket in there. There's a couple guitar picks in there. I got one with
Okay.
Ace's face on it. But yeah, when I bring this album to him, I told him I was like, man, I had this album Ace since I was like in third grade, 1978. And he just like looked up at me and said, yeah, and then kept signing. Like he just like he must have heard that from like 150 fucking 50-year-olds that day when he was like, all these 50-year-olds talking about being little kids getting that signed. And yeah, it's fucking awesome. I got pictures with him that day, Ace, and we had one of those fun saver cameras, and you didn't know until you got home with it if the picture was blurry and came out like shit. And sure enough, we got two pictures, and they both were fucking blurry. So a couple of years later, he was at another convention that I was at, and I was like, "Fuck it, let's just meet him again, but we won't get his autograph. We'll just pay for the picture." And that was a little better. He was funny. Like he had my wife was sitting in between us, and like right about the picture about to take, he took his arm and like tried to push me out of the picture, like get the fuck out of the picture. Like he just wanted the picture with my wife. It was funny, It was pretty cool. A little bit more of an interaction with him that time, but yeah, I mean that was like the beginning, and then we go around again and talk about like the next step from there. But that's my origins. Definitely, I blame Kiss for everything.
Nice. So, Kristian,
What's up?
welcome back to the show.
Good to be
My
back.
fucking buddy from Connecticut. What's your origin story?
Origin story. So I mean, I didn't like it, at least as a little kid, I didn't really consciously like listen to bands or seek out music or anything like that. But at least my first exposure, at least according to my mom, so when I was born, newborn out of the hospital to sing me to go to sleep, she sang Joe's Garage from Frank Zappa. So I guess that was my first the first music I ever heard in my life. But yeah, I mean, just growing up, the stuff like my mom would play or something. It's usually just a lot of classic rock stuff. She was into Madonna for like a little while, so you'd hear that. And I remember there was that Fine Young Cannibal song, that the whatever hit song that they had. Like, I don't know, she played
Drives
that
me crazy. It
yeah,
drives
like
you
all the
crazy.
time,
Yeah.
all the time.
Drives me crazy.
And and
How,
there's that.
how
And
old is your mom now? How old is your mom now? I just wonder how old is she
she's
now?
65, I think, or
Oh, okay.
67. Yeah, that range. Um, so yeah, anyway, so then you go on like the school bus in elementary school and they're playing like just like top 40 radio, and none of that like ever really like appealed to me or anything. And then it was probably my 12th birthday. My soon to be stepdad bought me a CD player, like a CD cassette player as like a birthday gift. And I remember thinking it was kind of weird because I wasn't like really listening to music or anything like that. So then like the one CD that I had was, it was one of those like compilation CDs that you see like that you would see advertised like late at night, like greatest rock hits or some shit like
Now
that.
that's
So
what I call hits.
yeah.
Your
Something like
rock
that.
ballads.
It was like
Freedom rock.
yeah. It was like all like 70s stuff. So it was like you had Fly By
Probably
Night,
Freedom
Rush.
rock.
Yeah. Um I'm trying to think what else was on there. Oh, Black Betty, like that type of
Bam.
Yeah, man.
yeah.
Awesome.
So that was like my beginning of like starting to like listen to music, was that CD. And then I remember I did get a couple different Rush albums from there. I got Roll the Bones, Farewell to Kings, and Permanent Waves. Like those are the three CDs that I bought like shortly after that, and I listened to them for a little while. And then they kind of fell out of interest, and then years later I kind of started getting back into them again and try to get all the other albums and CDs. But at that time too, it's like you start watching like MTV to just because I'm curious, like what's out there. But it definitely very early on definitely gravitated towards just like rock or hard rock. Um, that's also the time when Beavis and Butthead was like coming out, so you're watching that. And so then I started listening to started branching out a little bit, like some of the bands that were like really popular. I'm talking like early 1993. So you like you know, Guns N' Roses were still really huge, so I was getting into, Appetite for Destruction and Use Your Illusion, buying those albums, and then like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Don't really listen to it now, but at the time, that was everywhere, So
Oh
when you're
yeah.
first discovering this, that's what you go to. And then
Yeah.
at the time I remember Metallica were also like the Black Album was still like really huge. And then when I started listening to them, I'm like, okay, I kind of started gravitating like a little bit, heavier. And then I remember I'm like, all right, I had the Black Album. I loved at the time, I loved it a lot. And then I went to buy another Metallica CD, and I saw this one,
Ooh.
and I'm like, oh, there's like, right. I thought it was like Ride the Lightning, has like lightning bolts and shit on it. And I thought that's kind of cool. So then I remember like I put these CD home, I put this on, and then you hear like Fight Fire with Fire. And I was just like totally blown away. I'm like, this is something completely different. And I was just like totally blown away by it. And that basically just set me on the path for, finding, simpler, like that's the moment I would like the title of the episode is like when you like I knew I was a metalhead by the time I picked this up, and I wasn't really listening to some of the other stuff as much. So then I get all of their CDs, and then that leads to getting into like Megadeth and Slayer, and then just branching out from there. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Metallica is a great fucking starting point, if you ask your boy.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's funny, like at the time, like when I first listening to the Black, like I didn't have too many friends who were into metal at the time, and if they were also like just learning about the whole world. So no one was like, "Oh, that's the
Right.
Sellout album." Eventually, you hear people say that later on. So it was really
Yeah.
like it's like that's all I knew, and then like going straight to this, I immediately was like, "Holy, like this is different,"
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Ovi, all the
Yeah.
way from Norway.
Yeah.
What do you say about your origin story?
Well, I grew up my first years with my mom, and she liked music. She liked Norwegian music, and she liked Aha, of course, with Take on Me, and TV always shines on TV and stuff. And then I ended up in a foster home back in '86, and to a very conservative family with not stop music at all. We are
Wow.
like, yeah, could be go outside and do something that's worth your time. Don't just sit inside and just don't do anything. You have to work. So, but I guess school was really the reason. Elementary school was the reason how I got into music, because we had music class and we had like 10 top 10 songs where 10 random people in the class got selected to present a song they like and stuff. And uh, I guess I got a CD of Motley Crue, I guess, with what's the name? Shout at the Devil, and because the rest of the boys in the class, they liked Slippery When Wet and New Jersey and Meatloaf and you name it. So when I put on this and put on Looks That Kill and stuff, I'm like, the guys went like they didn't like it at all. Well, sorry, the boys really liked it, but the girls didn't care for it at all. So I didn't win. Then I think I bought Alice Cooper with Hey Hey Stupid, plainly just because of the front cover, because I thought it was pretty cool in elementary school. Then I got Kiss with Harder Than Hell on cassettes, and Our Maiden with Fear of the Dark, and yeah, that's about the origin. Or I was away to my foster mom had a friend, a childhood friend that I would stay with because she worked late sometimes, and her son was into bikes and stuff. So I got into George Thorogood and CC Top with the Dugello and Worldwide Live with Scorpions, like uh, not original cassettes, but like recorded tapes, and like WWF and monster trucks, and yeah.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. Tony Dio, I'm very interested in your origin story.
Well, I pretty much grew up as a kid. My parents, like my dad, was a music fan, but he liked country, so we had country all the time. I mean, Merle Haggard and Porter Wagner and all the stuff like that. That's what he liked. And he had my dad had 8 tracks, and he always played 8 tracks. He had them in the car. He had an 8-track player in his shop, and they bought me an 8-track player when I was probably 5 or 6, and so I started borrowing his tapes and stuff and playing them. And you'd be surprised. I'm a big fan of the TV show Hee Haw, and we watch them. Me and my buddy will watch them on YouTube, and he is just blown away that I know who everybody is on that show. He goes, "How do you know this?" I'm like, "I know everybody. I know it all. I know the performers. I know the comedians on there." It's just, yeah, he's just blown away by it. So my first rock and roll tapes that I remember having was some that my dad had, that like Jerry Lee Lewis, hearing Great Balls of Fire. And I mean, that was like metal compared to listening to Merle Haggard. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
And I like that 50s rock and roll stuff. And of course, Happy Days kind of came out about that time. And I started watching that and loved, the music and, the Fonz and everything that went along with that. And Elvis passed away. And but I had an Elvis tape, an 8-track tape of Elvis, and it had all like the Elvis Presley's greatest hits, and I loved that. And that was my tape. That wasn't my dad's; it was mine. And I played the crap out of it. Sadly to say, years later, when I was in my teenage years, going through my parents had. You remember those big wooden stereos, like a piece of furniture with the turntable, and my parents had something like that. And I was digging through there looking for something, and found that tape, and I looked at it, and I happened to really concentrate and read the fine print that was on it, because I'd only looked at the title and the names of the songs, and it says, you know, Elvis Presley's greatest hits, and in very fine print it says, as performed by Ronnie McDowell, not Roddy McDowell, but Ronnie McDowell.
Oh wow.
Ronnie McDowell is a world famous Elvis impersonator. So I'm going,
shit.
wow. I was listening to an Elvis impersonator. My childhood is a farce. Wow, you know. So anyhow, my mom would she worked until like 5 o'clock. So school's out 2:30. So I would catch a ride to a school friend's house when I was in elementary school. His mother would pick us up, and I'd stay at his house until mom picked me up. And this kid had music. He loved music. His mother loved music, and she bought him whatever he wanted, you know. So he had all this cool rock stuff. She'd either buy him a record every week or a 45 7-inch record. He had everything. I mean, and he turned me on to stuff like ZZ Top and Ted Nugent, Peter Frampton, Cheap Trick. He just had all that. Sticks. I remember he had the Queen, Another One Bites the Dust. He's the first person I think I ever knew that bought that on a 45 single. And a lot of that stuff. So I would bring the tape recorder over, or he actually had an 8-track recorder, and my grandmother had one too in her stereo. You could record 8 tracks. You could buy 8 tracks like blank and record them. So I was always making compilation 8 tracks, and I eventually moved to making compilation cassettes, and I'd buy those cheap little, you could buy a 3-pack of Sertron cassettes for like $2. They're horrible tapes.
Sertron?
Yeah, they would get chewed up or whatever, you know, really easy. But I was always making compilations from my friend Rich's, go to Rich's house, and he'd have everything. And so I'd have the coolest little mixtapes or whatever. And then I started listening to the radio a lot, and just and I was big into like Star Wars, and much like what Count Ralphus was saying, monsters, comic books, you know, just I was into NASCAR. My dad would go to NASCAR. So I was big into like Dukes of Hazzard and just so much stuff. I mean, just a plethora of just entertainment. So it wasn't just all revolved around music like my life does now, you know, but I was all into different stuff. But I'd listen to the radio all the time, whatever's on the radio. It just seems like, you know, well, back up a little bit. My dad, when I was over at Rich's, when they played some Kiss, and I thought it was the coolest thing, just like Count Ralphus. I see the picture of Rock and Roll Over, and I'm like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. So my dad took me for my birthday to this head shop called Tape City. It was a head shop, 8 tracks in the front, party goods in the back.
Nice.
And I walked in and I told the guy I'd heard Hard Luck Woman by Kiss, and I really liked that song. Because like I said, I came from country too, so I really liked that song. And the guy walked out with the Kiss Rock and Roll Over on 8-track. And I said, nice. That's it. That's what I want. So, you know, I remember coming home, putting it on. And if you know this album, it starts off with I Want You. And it's a mellow song. My mom's like, what'd you get? And then the power chord kicks in. She's like, oh, this isn't too bad. And the power chord kicks in. Oh, Lord, you know. So, yeah, I was bitten by the bug of Kiss. And, yeah, it kind of just spiraled from there. Like I said, I started listening to the radio. I was always recording stuff off the radio, but I always gravitated to the stuff that was the power chords, the heavy stuff. You know, Foreigner, Hot Blooded, had a 45 of that, played the grooves out of that thing, you know. I was thinking like, this is going into, I used to always record, I'd put TV, like if there was any music on TV, like Saturdays, you used to see the Blue Jean Network on TV that would show like concerts and stuff. And American Bandstand would have rock bands. I mean, they'd have the dance music. They'd have rock. I remember recording with a tape recorder in front of the TV, recording Molly Hatchet on American Bandstand, doing Beating the Odds. And I think they did, what was the other song they did? Rambler, I think was the song they did. And nice. Just stuff like that, you know, just recording. I play those things to death. I think my second Kiss record that I got was Alive 2, and that was on 8-track. So I didn't get the cool fold out, centerfold, gatefold like Ralph had earlier there, you know. But I remember looking at Rich's, and I had a couple other friends that were into it. But my mom was, she got on that whole kick about about them being Satanists and stuff. So I couldn't have any Kiss posters or shirts or anything, but I did keep the music. She never really said anything about that, but I wasn't allowed to put the posters up or anything. I remember Kiss Meets the Phantom came on, premiered, and she's like, "You're not going to watch that." There was all these church groups trying to get it to stop it from being aired on the local TV networks or whatever. And I just like, hey, I'm going to Rich's to spend the night. Oh yeah, that's fine. Totally forgot it was Kiss Meets the Phantom night. So I go over there and we set up and watched it, and it was freaking awesome. And but I remember getting the first Kiss comic book that's supposedly printed in blood, because I was buying comics and stuff then. So I ended up getting that. But yeah, that's where it kind of just evolved. And that would be right up to around about 1980. I started getting more into radio stuff. Got into new waves. I liked the Police and the Cars, and Devo was huge. I love Devo. I just went to see them recently, and I thought Whip It, the Whip It album was just so cool. I remember getting that one and stuff. But the band I think that really brought me back to it all was hearing Van Halen for the first time, and that was probably 81 or so. I was at the lake, and at this little clubhouse there that kids you'd go to the clubhouse, and they had pool tables and pinball machines, and a lot of the juvenile delinquents would be hanging out there smoking and stuff. And this dude had a car, like a old Nova, and it had a killer stereo in it, and I heard Eruption for the first time, and I was like, and it went into You Really Got Me, and I was like, who is that? And he goes, that is Van Halen. And it just stuck in my brain. I got to get some Van Halen. So it was still a couple of years before I actually got my first Van Halen record. But yeah, hearing that, I was like, God, man, I always just want to gravitate to this guitar driven stuff, the new wave stuff, and all was kind of cool, but now this other stuff just makes me feel good when I hear it, and so that was kind of the formation moving into the heavy metal years for me.
Nice. So I guess I gotta go. I remember the first time hearing something that blew my fucking mind. So my dad was also a country guy, and my mom was very Motown, early rock. Diana Ross and the Supremes. She loved Jackie Wilson. That was her guy. She loved Elvis. That was also her guy. And my dad was a country dude and hated everything that was not country music. If it wasn't country, he called it a certain kind of homosexual slur, and that's all it was. So the main rock I remember being exposed to early was hanging out with my sister in the living room. MTV is on. MTV is probably brand new. I'm probably 3 years old. And Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It video comes on MTV. And my sister loses her mind. And she's screaming, "Oh my God, it's Twisted Sister." She's on the phone calling girlfriends. "Put on MTV right now. Holy shit, Twisted Sister's on TV." So she's losing her mind. She's calling people. She's cranking the TV up. My dad is losing his mind because there's rock music playing.
And they look like that as well. So
well, that made my dad even more.
I can even imagine your dad. You made me think of the Dire Straits thing. Look at those yo-yos. That's the way you do it.
Absolutely. So he hated it, but my sister used to go see Twisted Sister when they were like nobodies. She used to go to all the local clubs in New York and Long Island and stuff, and go see them in Rat Race Choir together all the time. And those guys couldn't buy a hit, that they put out those first couple albums, and then all of a sudden Stay Hungry comes out, and We're Not Going to Take It is in constant rotation on MTV. Yeah, and I remember exploded. Like my sister being so excited got me into it more, and her cranking the TV up, I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. I've never heard anything like this. I dig this. And then the video after it was Quiet Riot, Come On, Feel the Noise. And then I was just like, this is just as cool. Holy shit, this is awesome. What is this that I'm hearing? And my sister's not even paying attention. She's still calling girlfriends. Fucking Twisted Sisters on TV. So I remember that really affecting me. And that being the first time I heard music that I was like, I want to hear that over and over again. So I became addicted to MTV, and it was impossible to take me away from the TV. Um, my sister was also a big fan of like 70s classic rock. She was in love with the Doors. Jim Morrison was her favorite person that ever existed. So she would play the Doors a lot when my dad wasn't around and making comments about how Jim Morrison was a so and so. And so that was always cool. I liked hearing that because it was guitar driven and it was harder than all the stuff my dad listened to and all the stuff my mom listened to. So I really appreciated that. She would put Led Zeppelin on once in a while. I like that even more. Um, and then yeah, just watching MTV, like videos coming out from Rat. I remember first seeing the video for Round and Round, and I thought that was so great. And a little bit later, Poison and Motley Crue, and I loved all that stuff, man. And I started collecting singles for you kids out there. I don't know if you remember singles, but you get them in this little sleeve.
There's one.
Yeah, there you go. This little sleeve, and you'd pull it out, and you get if you were smart like me, you would go get your singles and you'd pick one out where there was one song on side A and then a different song on side B, because some of them had the same song on both sides.
So some had exclusive only B-sides.
That's right. Yes, cool. This Mom I'm Coming Home one had Don't Blame Me on side 2. You only got that on this. And check that out. I know Count Ralphus is gonna love this. Check out that Poison one. It's still got the crap on it.
I got a bunch of them still, but not that one. But
yeah, I'll pick them up.
What year were you here? What year were you listening or seeing that like Twisted Sister video? I'm just wondering because
it had to be 83.
Oh wow! So how old were you at that time? You were like
3.
Oh shit! I was thinking like, how the fuck? Because I kind of remember the same thing with that video, and I'm thinking like, wait a second, I'm way older than him. I didn't. I was just wondering. I didn't realize
when
that
I was
you were
3.
3 years old. Yeah, I remember Rockabye Baby or Rockabye Baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's a fog until about 6 years old.
Yeah.
That's definitely one of my very earliest memories is that Twisted Sister video, and then the Quiet Riot one right after. And I just remember being like, oh my God, I want to hear that all the time. It's so cool.
That was the first heavy metal album to go to #1 in America, that Quiet Riot album.
That's right. That's right.
You see little baby Jaymz, he's jamming out in front of the TV, you know.
I probably was. I was probably fucking dancing my little fat ass off
with a bandana
crap.
So that was like, going through all that. Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, Rat, Dokken, Poison, Crew. I loved all that stuff. And I started to appreciate the other music, the older 70s music my sister was into. And then Guns N' Roses happened. And then it was over. That was the band. I remember my sister leaving for work one day. I was 7 years old. And she's on the way out the door. I'm watching MTV. I'm playing with action figures, probably He-Man, fucking Masters of the Universe figures. And MTV is playing in the background. And she's about to leave. And she's like, hey, have you heard that band Guns N' Roses yet? And I'm like, no, what's that? They got this really cool video for Welcome to the Jungle. So keep MTV on. It's gonna come on. They've been playing it. You'll eventually get it. So I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah. She walks out to work. I mean, after the next video that was Phil Collins or whatever the fuck was playing, all of a sudden, world premiere video flashes on the screen. And here comes Guns N' Roses with Sweet Child of Mine. And I immediately dropped what I was doing and was like, oh, this is the band, she said. And I'm watching it, and the video's so cool, and they look so cool, and the song is epic, and the guitar solo fucking rules. And they look like dudes that my dad would hate, that would kick my dad's ass. And I'm just like, this is what I want to do now. From that moment when I saw that video, I said to myself, everybody else I know wants to, all the kids I go to school with want to be cops and doctors and all that shit. I want to be in Guns N' Roses. Like, it wasn't even I want to be in a band. It was I want to be in GNR. And that was really the fucking catalyst. Like, opened the door and was like, I fucking love this. And this is what I want to do. This is what I want to listen to. I want to work at a record store and sell this shit. I want to be in a band that plays this shit. I want to be on MTV. I want to be in posters and magazines and all that. That was the band that really made the biggest impact and the biggest influence and really made me start to take music serious was Guns N' Roses. So yeah, that's my origin, much to my old man chagrin. So I guess we'll move into what really cemented everything and where we got like we started to become hardcore fans, right?
Yeah, just like even just the part two, I mean, I don't know how many times we want to go around, but like as we're talking, I start thinking about all these other things because we really didn't have much time to think about how we were gonna do this. But so as we're talking, I'm thinking, oh, right now, I'm already just like right after my Kiss story, like I'm ready to go to my part two of it. Is kind of like how Tony was saying he recorded like the TV. That was a big deal. I remember getting the tape recorder. And
yes,
the cassettes, when you're young, you couldn't really afford to go out and buy albums and stuff, but you could buy the blank cassettes and kind of lived on that. But I remember just sitting by the radio, Foreigner song would come on, I would hit record. I wouldn't know who I'm recording, but I just remember certain songs I liked. But even like I'd have like when I was real young, I'd even have like Village People on there and stuff, just like whatever the catchy hit was at the time. You just hit whatever you're hearing on the radio in the 70s. And another cool thing was like where I lived, I grew up in a townhouse and we had a big park right in front of my house, and the block went around in a big square with a big square park in the middle. And it was just kids out there all the time. We had a basketball court, there's a football field right there. It was a pretty big park, and there's always kids out there. There's always music going on. Like either kids in the park had their little box radios and whatever. My neighbor next door on my right side, the one son, a lot older than me, one son played guitar, and then the other son was like even older, and he was like the tough guy in the neighborhood. But they had people hanging out and partying there. His father like was like a correction officer or a policeman or something, and he was like always gone. And like they always were partying right next door, and I'd be in the garage like with my little rubber monsters or playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, but there was always music going on, like right while we had the garage open. They had their garage open, they're drinking and partying out there. And I heard like the Stones like crazy. Rolling Stones was like their main band. But I remember hearing stuff like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and not knowing who they were until years later when I finally heard. I go, oh yeah, I've heard this before. And I had to like think back, why did I know these songs? It was because they were always playing that kind of stuff. They were always kind of playing the edgy stuff. And a lot of Hendrix was always like in the area. Other school, there were so many kids there. And I remember it being like it was like disco versus rock. Like it would be like the mantra was like rock rules and disco drools or disco sucks, and that was like the big thing. Like I took a side like really early on without even really like knowing that like yeah, the Village People wasn't rock. That was more like the disco era. But I had it all on the same cassette. I didn't know. But I remember in elementary school, whenever it rained out, we wouldn't be able to go out for recess. So they would have rooms were divided by like these things that they could open up, and the wall would open up, and they would join the two classrooms, and they had a record player, and kids used to bring in records to play. A lot of people were bringing in like I'm talking like fourth grade, so they were bringing like their parents' records in or whatever. But I remember hearing so much stuff where we sat there and looked at the album, like Billy Joel records and even Michael Jackson, not Thriller, but like the one with the socks, like glowing socks. I forget the name of it, but
Off the wall.
then yeah, Off the Wall. That was like a big one. Like some kids kept playing the same things like every time it rained, and
Mhm.
I fell in love with two albums that really stood out at the time. This one kid, he bring in Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and he bring in Pink Floyd The Wall. And both of
Nice.
them got banned because for the AC/DC Dirty Deeds, they had the Big Ball song. And when you're in fourth grade, we just start marching around. I got big balls. Who's got the biggest balls? They're like the teachers were like, what the fuck is this? They eventually caught on, and then it got banned. But I remember loving that. And Pink Floyd The Wall, the teacher, leave those kids alone. That was like my rebellious song. Like I yelled that words
Mhm.
every time that part came out. I just wanted to hear that one song over and over again. It was like because I was like a little juvenile delinquent, and I hated most of the teachers. And so yeah, that was like I wasn't collecting really albums at the time because I didn't have no money in fourth, fifth grade. Then it came to around sixth grade. I was always on sports teams, and I was did little league and Papa Warner football, but I was in wrestling from a real young age, like third grade. I was on a wrestling team before it was like not even part of the school. It was like a group of fathers got together and we went to tournaments every week. But when I got in sixth grade, our wrestling team would go on meets to other schools, and everybody was like listening to their Walkmans at the time. And I remember just like always getting cassettes and just having people tape me stuff. I'd have like Asia and just weird stuff. But then on this one time we were going, a friend of mine had Ozzy Speak of the Devil. And
Ooh.
I remember listening to it and just being like, this is what we should all be listening to before a wrestling match. Like this was getting us pumped. And then the same kid got like Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil right around the same time I was hearing that. And I remember I had this other two friends. I don't want to go too much into them, but like who they are, but because they both went on to these really big jobs later on. But they were juvenile delinquents at the time when we were kids, and they stole everything. They had every fucking cassette that came out. I heard everything for years and years. Like I just would bring tapes to them and say, tape me that one, tape me this one. And I got so much of my early collection like was on just being taped from these guys. And I remember I'd go out with them and I would buy cassettes with them at like the fairgrounds, and I'd be the only one buying the cassettes. I remember buying Twisted Sister and Dio cassettes at the fairgrounds, and while I'm buying them, they stealing like 10 cassettes each behind me. They're like stealing everything.
Ralph, were these when you bought them at the fairgrounds? Were they bootleg cassettes? I
I
used to
don't think
buy I
so.
used to buy
Yeah.
counterfeit bootleg cassettes at the fairgrounds at the flea markets
Yeah, I
there.
mean, it was
Yeah,
kind of the same sort of
yeah,
people,
because
and
you
they
could
had
get them for like $3 versus going to the
yeah,
store and paying $8 for it.
and those
Huh.
mirrors were like all bootleg stuff. So it could have
Mhm.
very well, and the shirts were always bootleg shirts at the
Mhm.
fairgrounds too. So they probably weren't. I just didn't even realize it at the time. But I just remember they had such a collection, and it made me go, I want to start collecting them, but I didn't have money. I get a paper route, and now all of a sudden I got like besides the two kids that stole everything, all of a sudden I started having like the best collection because I was getting like $30 a week. And nobody had $30 a week in sixth grade. I was like the only one that was
Yeah.
able, and that was right when I stopped collecting comic books like on a daily basis or a regular basis. and I started using any extra money I had, started going to getting albums and records. And one of the things that really boosted my collecting was Columbia House. And I know every era of us, so we all had Columbia House or BMG or whatever it was called for later people. But when
Both of
I joined Columbia House. I did a whole episode on Sea Tranquility about Columbia House with just me and Scow and Pete Pardo, and we talked about it. And I did the first one, and I didn't even know like the deal. You just kept seeing every magazine you got. I would get Cream and Hit Parader and Circus magazines, and every one of them had those ads for 1 penny for 11 cassettes or 12 cassettes. And I didn't even go beyond like reading what you have to do after that, it would just seem like here's your penny. And so I get them, and then all of a sudden they start sending me the album of the month because I'm not responding to them saying like I'm not picking one. So I think I maybe picked the very first one, and then after that I realized that I had to pay for that full price, even more than full price. And I started ignoring them. But then I was getting Pat Benatar was coming to my house and whatever they like early 81, 82, 83 were the years that I really did that. And so my parents like said, "What is this? Why are we getting this bill and stuff?" And I was like, "I don't know." And they call the people and they say, "He's 11 years old. Stop sending him shit." So they stop, and then the next year I do it again, but I figure they know my name, so I just like changed my middle initial or something, and boom, I got another 12. And the same thing happens again. And my parents again, they wiped it out. Then I try to do it like 6 months later again, and I got my initial 12 again. And then as soon as they got the first thing, they said, if I get one more bill for this, we're gonna take all your cassettes and we're gonna throw them in the garbage. And that was it. I had to stop from there. And then that time I just used a different name completely and then kept the same address. But the bill just kept coming to the house. They're like,
I
who the
did
fuck is
that
this?
shit too so many times.
Who's this Ozzy Dio guy that keeps sending all these bills to or whatever. But yeah, but that was a huge boost in my collection. Like all of a sudden in that short time, I'm like, I got all this heavy metal now. And by the first 12 I got, I remember like not even knowing 12 heavy metal bands to get, but I'm looking at these circus magazines and I'm going, oh, ZZ Top, Eliminator, that's gotta be metal. And then just like whatever looked metal. Like I thought everything like was metal. I thought Jethro Tull was metal. I thought, and so you had to like learn as you were going because no one was like mentoring you about it.
You
So
said
it was
Grateful
really
Dead. That sounds metal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Got that skull logo on there.
Yeah, I had a few weird things that I did, like I even had like Huey Lewis and news and stuff. It's like I just didn't know, and I learned quick though. And my friends and I start going to shows like right around the same time at like 13, 14 years old. I'm going to shows with my friends that have a mutual love for this music. And I guess I'll say that now instead of waiting for another round. But the first shows I start going to is like I see Dio on the Last in Line tour, and Twisted Sister was supposed to open up with Stay Hungry, and that they were so hot at the time. They were slugging it out for years in the club scene, but they had a little recognition going from the album before, You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. They did have a video for that, so they had the momentum going. But man, when Stay Hungry hit, that was huge. And that was a real big deal. The MTV played the whole concert on MTV and stuff, and that was a big one. I seen Triumph, Loudness, and Mountain. I seen uh Crocus played up at the Civic Center by me, and that got played as an MTV concert. Um Aerosmith at the fairgrounds was it was like my first real national act show, and with 38 Special, and I seen Night Ranger, and it was Night Ranger and 38 Special. Oh yeah, and Aerosmith was with the band called Orion the Hunter. Um Trying to
Wow,
think of what
love to
was
see
some of
that.
the other really early shows that I went to. But within a short time, like Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time and stuff. And then it was like a fight to get into a seat of a car, because there'd be like one car going to the concert and someone's parents were driving. But if you didn't get in there right away, it was like that was it. It was the only car going. And then you'd see them kids wearing the shirts for the rest of the school year. I had one friend, he had like an older cousin, and he took him to see Van Halen in 1984. He took him to see Ozzy and Motley Crue on Bark at the Moon. And it's like I knew about all these shows and stuff. I was right there, a big fan, but I couldn't get a ride to them, you know. It was like the following year, all of a sudden you got some friends that are not as old, but they're getting their learner's permit and their licenses and stuff. So then you start really getting rides to shit. And that by the time like 86, so that then I really started hitting like everything. And then I was getting into like Slayer and all that shit. But I just figured I'd add that part into my second part here, just like going from where we just talked about to like our first shows and stuff, you know?
Yeah, no doubt. I relate to a lot of that shit, dude, because there's like, there was a guy that lived upstairs from me that taught me how to play guitar when I was 12. And, he played electric guitar and he played it loud and he didn't give a fuck and he partied and drank and smoked weed and he listened to Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath. And I looked up to him so much. And, same thing with like buddies of mine in high school that were going to shows. And it's like, ah, you lucky fuck, you're going to that. And, yeah, I'd be like jealous for like a month
Oh
and a
yeah.
half.
Oh yeah. Especially if you were a fan. Just sometimes you just start seeing the shirts and you go like, who's this shirt everybody's wearing? Judas Priest or and Iron Maiden. I used to think it said Iron Accident because I didn't know what the logo was, and I thought it was a little X by the A there. And
Yeah.
but the monsters were drawing me in, and then Ozzy with the
Yeah.
fucking Bark at the Moon, he's a werewolf, and like to me, like it all connected. I was reading like
Mhm.
famous monster magazines in Fangor at the same time I was getting these heavy metal magazines, so it just all seemed to make sense to me, and anything that felt like it was in that world is where I kind of lead more and more into as I get into heavier stuff because the evil and the monsters and all that shit kind of goes more with the heavier stuff than with like the glam
Mhm.
stuff. So that's why I start going
Yeah,
in two different ways from there, you know.
of course. So Kristian,
What's up?
let's go into more of your like teenage years and delve a little bit more and let's talk about some of your first concerts.
So yeah, so I guess to pick up, where I was leaving off there, once I discovered Metallica and started going, got into the Black Album, discovered Ride the Lightning, then went back and then filled out the rest of the discography from there. So then obviously, so that led getting into Megadeth and whatnot. Slayer was next on the list after that. But then at the same time, like about seventh grade, it's like then once I decided, or I'm going to grow my hair long, I'm going to start buying, concert t-shirts and that sort of thing, then you start like, connecting with other kids at school who are kind of into the same thing. And, and at that time, it's not like, there might be two or three other kids in my class who were like listening to metal or rock or anything like that. So it's like immediately, it's like, you stick out like sore thumbs. So immediately it's like, you start like hanging out and, and, talking and whatnot. Um, but yeah, so, again, watching, Headbangers Ball was still on MTV at that time. I'm talking like, 93, 1994. So we're watching that with friends. We're watching Beavis and Butthead. I'm taping episodes of that, and I'm taping episodes of Headbangers Ball, and just discovering a lot of the newer bands that were coming out at that time. Um, I remember, I have a brother who's a year younger than me, so a lot of us kind of had the same friends, like while we're going through school and whatnot. I remember like, having like sleepovers at the house when we're like, 13 years old. We have a video camera making our own Headbangers Ball and we're playing like Megadeth or Metal or whatever. And then we're just like videotaping ourselves moshing, like acting like idiots, thinking we look cool, but don't really look that cool. Well, I don't know. We thought we did. One time we had like powdered sugar or something. We're pretending it was like cocaine. We had like a little mirror, like
Oh
chop.
wow.
And my mom found it and she got real pissed. But it's just like the silly shit you do when you're like when you're that age. I guess it was a good thing that it wasn't like we were really like snorting coke or anything. Like you
Well,
know,
yeah.
13 years old, but she's like, you can't be acting like that, But from there, it's like, getting into discovering new bands that are coming up on like Headbangers Ball. So Guar was like one of the bands that me and 'cause my friends started to really get into with all the the costumes and everything and the squirting blood on the stage shows and all that. So that was ended up being my first concert. So it was a 14th birthday present. I got to I knew they were coming around. They were playing Toad's Place in New Haven, and I just had the CD, This Toilet Earth. So I was like, I was begging my mom, my stepfather to go, and I think I had to get like good grades in school or something. So that term I did all right, like good enough that they would let me go. So that ended up being the first concert I went to. The band that opened for him, I think I talked about this before on here
I
when
was
we were.
gonna say, I was just gonna say the Meat Men, right? That was
Yeah,
that
no,
show.
no, the Beatmen was the next tour. That was in '95. This one, it was a band called Bile that was they were like an industrial
Oh yeah,
band.
I've seen
yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah. I've seen
Yeah,
him a
and
few
then
times. I was a big fan of them.
you were. I tell you what, there didn't seem like there were that many fans of them at this show because everyone was just like booing them, and it was
Energy Records. Yeah.
That Suck Pump album is fucking classic. One of the best industrial albums of all time, I think.
yeah. My friend liked. I didn't really get into them that much. My friend he liked it. He bought like their T-shirt and their CD and everything at the merch booth, and he listened to them for a little while, but I never really I don't know I never really took to them, but is what it is. The only thing that sucked about that show is I had to leave early because it was a school night. So my stepfather took me and my friend, and then at like I don't know, it was like 10:30, 11, whenever they're like 3 or 4 songs in, he's like, "Oh, school night, we gotta go." So
Oh,
I remember you telling that story. I seen
so yeah,
Bile
I
open
didn't.
up for Marilyn Manson at the Limelight in the city, and it was when Marilyn Manson was just right before he broke and became really popular, and
Yeah.
Bile was opening. And we went to the Limelight just to see Bile. I didn't even know who Marilyn Manson was. I like knew the
Oh
name,
wow,
but
cool.
I didn't even like. I went all the way down there just for them because I had already seen them once before, and I liked them, and we were fans of them and shit. But yeah.
Yeah, that's
sick.
cool. Oh yeah, that's when I started, going to shows. I didn't, yeah, at least at that age, I didn't go to too many shows because I didn't, I wasn't driving yet. So, but that was the only one that I had to do. That was the only time where I had to leave a show early. Any other times it was just, it was like summertime, and then by the time you're getting a little bit older, so then you're driving to shows and everything, or you're driving with a friend to a show and whatnot. So, at least the next time I saw Gwar, I got to see them for the whole show. I didn't have to leave early. But so yeah, from there it was just as you get a little bit older, I started going a little bit backwards, like with bands that like I started bands that were popular like in the 90, 94, 93, and the thrash stuff. But then I started getting into Maiden and Priest and Ozzy because I bought a vinyl, a record player off the Bargain News. So then I started like, collecting vinyl. So then I go through some record shops to use vinyl and I see like, Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time, Judas Priest, Defenders of the Faith. So then, my taste kind of started going there rather than getting into some like the newer bands that were coming out. Um, so that kind of, I don't know, solidified most of, what I listen to today, or, most of the bands that I still like and go back to a lot. So
That's
I
awesome.
can't imagine seeing Gore as like my first concert. Like everything would be like so disappointing after that. Like your first concert, you're seeing heads getting
Yeah.
chopped off and blood
all
squirting
right.
on everybody. It's just like the most insane show ever. And then it's like,
Yeah.
what the fuck are you gonna see after that?
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
definitely.
I got to step away for a second. I'll be right back.
All right, dude. So, Ovi,
Yeah.
let's go into your teenage years and what you were listening to and first shows that you attended.
Well, say sixth grade would be around 93, 94. So we did have, like, in Norway only had one channel, only one TV channel, but in 92 we got a second channel called TV2. It
Ooh,
was, yeah, it
Wow,
was
two
creative stuff.
channels.
But yeah. And there was a music channel called the VTV. like video TV. They sent all the music videos, and on Thursdays they had like Hard Rock or Enter Sadman or yeah, Guns N' Roses with November Rain or what's the other one with the big tanker on it?
Strange.
Strange. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Aerosmith with Crying and all those songs. I don't know, Lily Shaw Silverstone, I think, was in those videos. And
Yeah, she was. Oh my goodness.
yeah, and then I think around that time, wasn't it that around that time Offspring came with Self Esteem and Green
Yes.
Day came with Basket Case and
Yep.
what the other ones in the class were listening to. Then Unbroken came on that one Thursday, and I was like, oh yeah, that was something else than Nothing Else Matters and Enter Sadman for sure.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, and then Planet Caravan came on as well, and it was, I don't know, it wasn't like metal, but it was like it had such a it's such a good melody that it gets stuck in your head. And of
Yes.
course, it took some time for me to discover that wasn't really Pantera's song. So and and also with the Rolling Stones was mentioned a lot of times here. My first encounter with Rolling Stones was "Love Is Strong," I think.
Voodoo Lounge.
Yes, with Charlie Watts playing on silos of stuff like he uses for
Yeah.
drum. And for me,
Yeah.
it's like
They were
everything that had
giants. Yeah.
yeah, anything that had the word love in it for me was like, nope, that's a no go. I'm not listening to that one. Or even if I had an album like Fear of the Dark and a song with love came in it, I just fast
Wasted
forward because
love.
yeah, I'm not gonna listen to anything with love in it. And then I started to I guess in junior high, I started to go to record store because I was living far out in the country, but then I had the bus access to the city and like record stores and stuff. And then of course you start to look on asking the people behind the counter what's the hardest music you have and so forth. And I think one of the first albums I picked out really for myself, I think was maybe in seventh grade, and it would be this one because I love the artwork for Practice What You
Nice.
Preach. It's such a cool artwork. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And soon after, I got the Danzig with the Troll Demon Spit live with the Green Demon on it or
Oh
the
yes.
Green Barbarian on it. Uh, of course, then I got more. I bought Guns N' Roses as well because it was something
Oh
to
yeah,
s-
Demon Slayer.
with Knocking on Heaven's Door. Yeah, and I thought Knocking on Heaven's Door was I had a good melody on it and it had guns in it. That
Yeah.
was cocking guns in it and stuff. And I was like, that was stuff. But I discovered too that wasn't really a Guns N' Roses song. So I bought Use Illusion, I think, on cassette for Christmas back in when I was in sixth grade or stuff. So that was around the right time too. Then I got introduced to a friend or to a guy that used to come to record store, and he knew another guy that was became my mentor and stuff like in metal. I've talked to Ralph about this a few times, and I showed him practice what you preach, and it was like the hardest thing you ever have heard and stuff. And I was like, he wasn't agreeing with me, and he did give me an album to look at or to check out, and it was Napalm Death with From Enslavement to Mutilation.
Wow.
Yeah, so that changed. This is probably the album that changed my whole life to what metal is, even though it's I don't know, it's grindcore punk. I guess it's crust punk grindcore. I wouldn't call this metal yet before Harmony Corruption. But for me, this was metal. I thought it was metal because it was so fast. I mean, it's like the album was over before it started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I had to get the newest album like soon after. Would be YouTube Banished for me, and I guess I like this album better than From Enslavement to Revelation back then because it was. I know it sounded much more brutal because it had a bigger sound. It was, of course, they had a death metal in it, and they had gotten Jesse in it and Mitch in it, so it was quite a change. Um, then I was in the big city again to some because I was gonna get like some form of like tests to see if I had ADHD or stuff, and I know I was fine and stuff, and I was stolen some money from my mom, and I was going to a record store called Rockin'. He was a really good fan with Udo Dirk Snyder, and he was like really liked in the metal community, and it was in the basement and stuff, and I bought this album because of the artwork.
Bolt thrower. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it was me and my metal mentor and kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of like Incantation would come into play because I showed him Cause of Death because I liked the artwork, and that was the most brutal death metal band in the world. Right, listen to the Nazarene album of Incantation, and I was like, he shut me up again. So it was pretty fun. As for my first concert, I believe would be pretty late. I was probably 17 or 18, or there would be Satyricon on the Rebel Extravaganza tour.
Oh
And
wow.
Bloodthorn was a Norwegian band that warmed up, and a fairly unknown band was number two called Keep of Collision. And Keep of Collision would be
Oh,
like, if you know black metal, Keep of Collision would be one of the big ones after some years.
yeah.
So that would be my first concert, would be in Trondheim. So I
Awesome.
didn't really go to much shows because it was in the big city, and I didn't have any much metal friends except my mentor, and he was like busy with his. He was importing black metal and stuff that would become in my next circle, which
Okay.
were like, yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah, that was. I mean, like from seventh grade to ninth grade. I mean, so much music that we got introduced to back then. I mean, it's. I don't understand how we got the time to listen to it everything because I seem to remember listening to an album for months in and months out, but still,
Yeah.
I discovered 100 bands. I feel like I listened to them just as much. So those were the golden years.
It's something
Absolutely.
about absorbing it too when you don't have 8 million fucking CDs and stuff. Like you absorbed
Yeah.
everything that you did get back then, and
Every
you learned the
nook and cranny.
lyrics. You knew every nook and cranny of the thank you list and everything. And it
Oh yeah.
changes as the more that you get, the more you get. It's like you just don't absorb music the same way no more.
It's true. That's true. Tony
Yeah.
Dio, let's
Yeah,
go into your second half of your origin story. And I gotta go take a piss. I will be right back.
a lot of what Count Ralphus has said. I mean, me and you are like so much alike because we're pretty much the same age, and we kind of
Yeah.
came into all this stuff at the same time and all. But we're talking about like money and stuff, trying to get money to buy stuff. I only as a kid, I only got like $1 a week allowance, and I mean that was late 70s, early 1979, 78 or whatever, and you could get stuff. But I had learned quickly how to make a buck at school so I could have money to go out and buy, comic books and Star Wars figures and stuff like that. I would sell as soon as my mom would drop me off at school in the mornings, and as soon as she would get out of view, I would go across the street to the store, little general store, and buy candy, like now and laters and hard candies and stuff like Mary Jane's and stuff. You could get it all. It was like 5 cent a piece, and you'd sell them at school all day for 25 cents a piece. So you
I
could,
remember people doing that
and I was
with like
like, I was one of the candy
Hubba
people. I
Hubba
always
Bubba
had
and stuff.
candy, And the kids would always buy candy from me. Where these other kids got all this money from, I don't know, because I sure couldn't. I had to hustle candy to get it. And then I drew, and I was an artist. I drew, and I would draw pictures for people. Somebody'd say, "Hey, can you draw me a picture of Dukes of Hazzard of General Lee?" And I would draw it, and I'd sell it to them for 75 cents or something. So my mom would like, "Where did you get this money?" Because on Saturday I'd be like, "Can we go to Kmart and buy a Star Wars figure? Where are you getting this money from?" So I was buying comics too. I was buying comics like crazy from like the flea market. That old comics that were worth money at the time, I had no clue. I just kept them. So that paid off when I got into collecting music later on. But yeah, I said I discovered Van Halen. I heard that Van Halen song, but it was still a couple years before I would actually get my first Van Halen tape. And that would be my school. We had a field trip to amusement park, the King's Dominion, which is up in Richmond, Virginia. And on the bus, I brought a little tape recorder, tape player. And we were playing. I brought cassettes of just stuff I had recorded off records and off my tapes and off of the radio, just mixes of stuff. And there was a guy on there, and he had Van Halen 2 on cassette. I remember it was a Columbia House Record Club version, because if you remember the original ones, they were indies. Their covers looked different. They were white with the album cover in the middle. But he had Van Halen 2, which I got on 8-track here. And I got that and the Led Zeppelin 4 from him on cassette. I traded him recorded cassettes. He wanted these songs, but I had maybe I had Jack and Diane or something on it. I don't know. He wanted it. And so he gives me these tapes. And I just got hooked on Van Halen 2. And it's still my favorite Van Halen record. And like that one it just kind of spiraled from there. I mean, I got to have more music. I started buying magazines. I started going out and getting Hit Parader and Circus Magazine. And they were like Bibles to me, whatever was in there, and a lot of the news and stuff that were in those magazines was a month and a half old by the time you read it. It wasn't like what today standards, getting news by the minute. But I started, picking up stuff like that. And I've told the story about someone gave me a cassette one day. We were just talking about music, and he gave me a cassette, and he had Heaven and Hell on one side and Blizzard of Oz on the other side. So that was my whole introduction to Ozzy, Sabbath, Dio, everything. And I was listening to that, and I started picking up cassettes. I would go buy cassettes. Ralph mentioned the fairgrounds. Our fairgrounds had flea market on Fridays, and in summertime when I wasn't in school, I'd go out there and buy cassettes, and they'd be bootleg cassettes. I mean, so they'd have I remember buying Scorpions Blackout, and it was a bootleg version of it, and but yeah, I just started picking up stuff out there and all. But MTV is I remember my friends had cable TV. We didn't have cable. I remember going to a friend's house, and we watched the US Festival from '83 because he had Showtime, and we didn't have show. We had gotten cable, but we didn't have Showtime. And that was Memorial Day of '83 when that concert happened. But I think they taped it, and it aired a little bit later on, maybe that fall or something. But I remember seeing Ozzy and Scorpions and Triumph and all on there, and just thought that was so cool, And MTV would get MTV, and I just started watching it all the time religiously, everything that was on it. And they played a lot of hard rock metal videos because they didn't have a lot of content, but you'd see, Motley Crue and stuff like that, was coming in. Well, but the main two, I guess I'll say the main two that I can remember that really hit me hard, I had to go out and buy, was Pyromania and Metal Health. And they were just such a huge rotation in '83, and I just loved them. And that was two of the first ones that I went out and got like brand new, went and bought them brand new, and didn't get like a secondhand copy or something like that, And it just kind of just got into stuff like that. And I didn't own any concert shirts until after I discovered the Van Halen thing. I think I went out and got Diver Down. I ended up getting Diver Down next or whatever after that. And my first concert shirt, Ralph brought up, or I know he keeps everything. I don't have all my old shirts from back in the day, but I did. This is actually the first concert shirt I ever bought. It's Van Halen.
Nice.
This is from
Wow.
82. And I bought it at like Record Bar or something like that. You know, it used to have sleeves. It was a 3/4 length sleeves. And because I mean, I always wore like Spider-Man and Dukes of Hazzard and NASCAR and all kinds of, you know, just stuff when I wore t-shirts and all. So that was my first. Mom wouldn't let me get any Kiss shirts. So that was the first one I got. And then I, you know, that started my wardrobe there, you know, just kind of, you know, you go to a concert and you buy a shirt, or you just buy a shirt at the record store or whatever. So moving into concerts. So my friend that I grew up with that turned me on to so much music, he ended up going to a different school. We remained friends, and he didn't live too far from me. So we always stayed in contact and stuff, and we'd hang out and meet at the mall and stuff. And he ended up he got into more, he was on more into Rush and Yes and stuff like that and all, but he still liked some hard rock and stuff. But he had an older cousin that could drive, so a lot of the early concerts I went to, 2 or 3 of them, I ended up going with them. We had to have somebody to drive because I was only like 14 or so, 15. And but my first concert was Loverboy and Zebra was the opening act, and Loverboy was on the Keep It Up tour, so that was in '83. It was I got the dates here. It was September 25th of 1983.
Wow.
And I don't know if you guys remember walking into your first concert, but the only thing I'd ever seen live music wise before that, my parents had taken me to some country stuff. But I mean, there'd be like some local bands would play at the park here in town. There was a couple of little local hard rock bands and stuff that I'd seen. I thought they were so cool. And there was a band called Night Watch used to play around here, and I just loved seeing them. They would play at the skating rink, so you could actually go see them, and they did it for kids and teenagers and stuff to go to. But they but yeah, walking into my first concert, I really didn't know what to expect, and we go in. I just remember it being so loud, and Zebra were already playing when we got there. I don't even remember much about them playing other than it was so loud, and there's so many people, and I'm just trying to take it all in, and I'm overwhelmed. And what's that smell, you know? Yeah. And yeah, it was just so much. It was just it was wow, you know, just thinking about, I kind of get chills thinking about it, because it was a new experience for me, you know. So yeah, that was my first show. I'll tell you what my first 5 shows were. My second show was Van Halen in February of '84, and that was Autograph opening. And Autograph didn't even have an album out. Nobody knew who they were. They were just a lucky band that David Lee Roth liked and took on the road. They got signed while they were on that tour, is what I've read.
Wow.
My third show was Ozzy with Accept, and that was in May of '84. And my 5th show was Scorpions with Bon Jovi in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia, and that was June of '84. I went to stay with my brother in Virginia Beach, and he said Scorpions are playing, I'll get us tickets. So he took us, and he didn't like stuff like that really at all, and I think he really liked Bon Jovi that night. Didn't really care much for Scorpions, but my brother was 17 years older than me too, so. But yeah, he turned me on to a lot of music when I was young too. He turned me on to Skinner, and he liked Grateful Dead a whole lot and stuff like that. You know, I remember when I was a little kid, he was always, you know, talking about those bands and stuff. But yeah, so like my whole world just kind of spiraled from that period. '83 was a breaking point. And if I had to say the year that I definitely became a metalhead was 1983, because that MTV and, you know, seeing all these bands and stuff. I remember just that we hadn't had MTV long. In September of '83, I sat up one night really late. I remember I had to go to school the next day, and I sat up late and there was watching a Van Halen special. It was a special that they did on Van Halen. They were interviewing David Lee Roth, and I'm getting ready to turn off the television and go to bed because it's like 11:30 or something. And it's like, don't touch that dial. The members of Kiss are here in the studio without makeup for the first time. You know, JJ Jackson and
shit.
the VJ. And I was just like, and I sat and watched it. And I remember my heart was about to pound out of my chest with excitement, because I was a massive Kiss fan from, you know, the kid, and to see this, you know, and honestly, I hadn't bought, I hadn't even bought Creatures of the Night at that time period. You know, I had kind of moved on to other bands and stuff. And when I remember, you know, when I first started buying magazines, I remember seeing an article about Kiss the Elder, you know, about their new look and their new sound. I was like, oh, I like to check that out. And I saw them on Solid Gold doing the song and stuff, but I was like, it kind of sucks. I kind of, you know, moved on from it, moved on to something else. But I love the Elder now. But yeah, I mean, so much was happening in just that period. I mean, it's just
lick it up,
you know,
put them back on the map with that hype.
Oh
with the
yeah,
makeup coming off. Lick it up, put them right back to.
Well, everybody was talking about it. You know, You know, it was. Did you see Kiss? You know, without makeup last night. You know, it was crazy. You know, when
they look like the one guy looks like an Arab. He looks like an Arab. The one guy.
Gene, I thought Gene was black at first, like, or something. He looked like he was, you know, he was a black guy kind of, you know, and Vinnie Vincent was a girl, but and still is. But yeah, I mean, like I said, just so much to take in. And it just grew from there, man. I was like, yeah, this is my music. This is what I want to be. This is what kind of person I want to be. And you know, I've never grown out of it. And we all have had people that we grew up with that have grown out of it. They moved on.
Some people, yeah.
And I mean, there's a core of us, and we're all like a family, because we, you know, we might not agree on the same band sometime, but it's all for the same vision. And it's just, I've seen so many people just walk away from it completely. And, you know, or they'll go to a concert every once in a while or something, you know, and it's, you know, or they'll move to something like I know people that were total metalheads and now they're all into like Dave Matthews Band and stuff like that, you know. Yeah. And I'm not knocking anything anybody likes. Everybody likes what they like. It's just,
fair enough.
I don't know. I just never grew out of it. I guess I never grew up, you know. So
fair enough.
It's like the Twisted
We're lucky
song,
with MTV at that time. MTV at that time, like you were saying, though, they played 75% hard rock and heavy metal in those first couple of years. Once they stopped playing that and they went on to the next trend, that's when it kind of fell apart a little bit. But it's like for people our age, But for people our age that were into it, man, it was every time you turned it on, you were going to catch something new, and you were always trying to keep up with all the bands. And your one friend gets one record, you tape it from him, and then you want to get something different. You don't want to buy that album. You want to get something because you already got that on cassette. Now you want something that they're going to tape from you.
That's something I was going to bring up. Yeah, man. When I started getting and buying tapes and stuff, and did join in Columbia House and ripping Columbia House off and off, you know, me and all my buddies were constantly borrowing and trading and recording. And like I said, I would go to this guy at this comic shop here and bring these old comics in, and the guy would be like, "This thing's worth $50. I'll give you 30 for it." You know, and I'm like, "Fine, take it." You know, I mean, I was selling all that stuff off so I could go buy records and tapes that weekend, you know?
Nice.
I did that with all my Star Wars figures and stuff. I'd have garage sales and I would just get rid of all my toys. And
I did that too, Ralph, and I regret it. I sold
me too.
Box full of Star Wars stuff for like next to nothing one time, maybe for like $100 or something to a guy, and I should have kept all that stuff.
I sold my Darth Vader case that was completely full with all like the first two movies. You know, it was like none of the Return of the Jedi ones because I was getting a little older.
Oh, the figures,
and they were just all in that one Darth Vader case, you know, and I had all the guns and everything. And I had it in the back. I actually have one now that I bought from somebody just a couple of years ago, but it wasn't like all the classic figures and stuff. But I had it in the back of my garage at a garage sale, and the woman came in, looked at all my crap, and was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh wait, what's that in the back there?" And I was like, I didn't really want to get rid of it, but she offered me like $30 for it, and I was like, "Oh, I could get a couple records with that," and I sold it, and it was like
Ha,
it was worth way more. But back then, no one was talking about them being collectibles or nothing like that. It wasn't until a couple years
yeah.
later that it started being collectible, and it was like, fuck it, I wasn't playing with them no more. So even though I wanted to keep them, I sold them. But now I got some of them back.
One thing, I'll kind of just finalize my story here. I had a guy tell me, oh, it's probably about 10 years ago, this guy that I used to hang out with in the late 80s, early 90s and stuff. Everybody was partying and we all listened to music and stuff. And he's passed away now, unfortunately. But he told me one day, because, I've ended up having working and having somewhat of a career in music and stuff, because I ended up working at Sanctuary Records for a while, but I've been working in concert promotions for years. I started out doing my own concerts and stuff, and putting stage and stuff, and booking bands, and going out and touring with bands and stuff, to working at the amphitheater for a Live Nation venue, working backstage with bands, being a runner and working in production and stuff. And this guy told me one day, he said, "Man, I got to tell you something, man." He says, "I'm proud of you, man." He says, "We used to poke fun at you because you were such a diehard and into all this stuff." And he said, "We used to just joke around about it." He said, "But you stuck it out, man. You stuck it out and you made something out of it, man." He said, I'm proud of you, man. You've done well." And I thought, so I just kind of took that to heart. I was like, "Yeah, thanks."
That's
Awesome.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's fucking awesome. Yeah, when I was a kid, I was really the only dude that really the only guy in school that listened to any kind of hard rock. And boy, did I take a fucking pounding every day for it. Not only by my peers, but my teachers. So I went to Catholic school,
Mm.
and I was always told, dude, you're going to go to hell. That Guns N' Roses stuff is gonna fucking, Metallica, all that. You're gonna burn and fucking all that shit. And I'm also of the era. I don't know if Kristian and Ovi can relate to this, where all of, like, my mother used to watch all the big talk shows like Geraldo Rivera and Sally Jesse Raphael and
Oh
Phil
yeah.
Donahue and all that shit. And there would always be an episode where it was, is heavy metal turning our youth satanic? We're going to talk to this priest and fucking five guys who don't fucking, whose opinions don't matter about heavy metal. And, my mother would make me sit and watch that shit with her, and she'd go, "See, this is the music you like. See what happens when you do." And they'd have some guy that was like, "Oh, I listened to Ozzy once and I shot heroin into my asshole, and I fucking went to put a gun in my mouth and all that." And it was always like really stupid. But then, like, they would show all these album covers for like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Wasp and Motley Crue and all this stuff, and I'd be like, "I want to hear that. I want to hear that. I want to hear that. I want to hear that one. Oh my god, what's that Wasp thing? I've never even heard of them. I want to hear that."
Was it the
So,
saw blade between his legs?
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
the PMRC stickers, the parental advisory stickers, that made me want to buy it.
Exactly. It had the adverse effect, and it just made me want to get more into it. And it really, like, I guess it like scared my mom for a long time, so it was like a taboo thing. So it was kind of like, "Oh, I don't want you buying this, I don't want you buying that." So I was for a little while relegated to buying like Bon Jovi, because that was like the only hard rock thing that my mom was like, well, he's a nice boy and you should listen to him. And that's hard rock. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, Ma, whatever the fuck, you know. And then my sister would sneak me things once in a while. I remember being a kid and getting the Welcome to the Jungle single, and it wasn't on 45, it was on an actual Kiss single. And that was one of the first things that was like played it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
first Skid Row album was huge for me. That was a few years later. And that was another one where it was like, wow, this is even a little bit heavier. So it started to get a little more dirty and a little more street. And I'm like, oh man, I'm really into this. And then I remember at 12 getting an acoustic guitar. My brother-in-law found it. Somebody was throwing it away. He stopped at the side of the street and grabbed it, and I saw it in his garage. And I was like, dude, you have a guitar? He was like, yeah, it's whatever. You want it, kid? Fucking take it. And I took that and brought it home. And the dude that lived upstairs from me, who was an older guy who reminds me a lot of Ralph and fucking Tony, like old school fucking, you know, dude was like almost 10 years older than me and sort of took me under his
Super
wing.
handsome, super handsome.
Very handsome, extremely handsome. Constantly had a gaggle of bitches around him.
Nice.
Yeah, but as long as he didn't, as long as he wasn't like, you know, the perv guy or something, you know.
No,
Hell, I got some popsicles in my basement. And some Ozzy records.
Want some popsicles? So yeah, this dude, like, he was the guy I was saying before, would play guitar and was into Iron Maiden and all that stuff. So I would run over to him, you know, upstairs and knock on his door. Dude, show me something. And he showed me how to play Iron Man. And I didn't even know what the fuck Black Sabbath was, but he showed me that. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is fucking great. I'm learning music. And I remember going down the street to a deli on the street from my house. And they had like one of those Lazy Susans with cassettes at the checkout counter. And I'm flipping through it, and there's Jimi Hendrix, there's Steve Miller, there's Bob Seger. And then all of a sudden, one day, I saw this Black
Yep.
Sabbath's Greatest Hits
Mhm.
with the Triumph of Death album cover.
Yep, that was my first
Man.
Sabbath with Ozzy as well.
Yeah, this was my very first Sabbath record. I think it was $4. I took the $4 out of my pocket and said, okay, there's not going to be any baseball card purchases today. I'm buying this Black Sabbath album. I had previously heard Ozzy a couple years earlier. When my brother went away to prison when I was a kid, he left a stack of records under our bunk beds. And I remember pulling the records out and just kind of flipping through them as a kid. And one of them was Blizzard of Oz. And that album cover scared the shit out of me. It looked like the cover to a horror movie. And I remember being scared to listen to it, but being left home one day and said, I'm going to go over to the turntable and pop this thing on. And I put it on, and I put it on side 2 because I didn't realize what was side 1 and side 2. And put on side 2 first, and Mr. Crowley starts. And I went, oh, shit, it is a horror movie. It's an audio horror movie. This is scary as fuck, but it's incredible. And then I let the song play through, and then I stopped the record, and I grabbed the blank tape, and I said, I'm recording this. Got the album on cassette, and put my brother's record back. And so when I found that Sabbath, I'm like, all right, I know Ozzy's in this band, so this has to be cool. And that kick-started the Black Sabbath addiction. I brought that cassette home and sat with it and had the acoustic in my lap, and I'm playing an acoustic guitar trying to learn Tony Iommi riffs, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind, play, and I'm trying to find the notes, and I'm doing it, man. I'm figuring it out. It's coming to me. It's happening, and that was the thing that really made me fall in love with Sabbath and really made me go, shit, I want to do this, man. Like I want to play music. I want to be in a band. I want to play shows. Um, yeah, and that's what sent me down the pathway, eventually getting into Metallica with the Black Album. The Black Album was so goddamn big you couldn't avoid it. And then my buddy who was teaching me guitar showed me Master of Puppets, and I kind of had a Kristian moment where it was like, oh shit, this is a completely different thing. It almost sounds like two different bands. And essentially it was, of course, but you get the point. That really opened the door for some more extreme things. Pantera comes out. I got really into Vulgar Display of Power. A buddy of mine taped This Love off of a local college radio station, 89.5 WSOU. Maybe Ralph knows that.
Oh yeah. Yep. I went to a
Yeah.
WSOU festival in the 90s and it was amazing. It was like a shitload of great bands played. Bile played and
There you go.
Misfits and Overkill, Propane, so many bands. It was like an all-day festival, WSOU festival in New Jersey.
SOU was the shit. So my buddy taped that Pantera song and showed it to me, and that was like, all right, I have to get this Pantera album now. This is so heavy. This is so killer. So that was really like what opened the doors, even for more extreme things. I got into death metal for a while. I got into Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and Deicide and stuff. I got jaded down the line in my 30s with death metal because a lot of the scene where I'm from, there's a lot of elitism. So if you listen to anything that doesn't have constant blast beats in it, you're called a certain name. And I kind of got tired of that. Um, yeah, so that's like my origin shit. My first concert ever, 1997. I saw Corrosion of Conformity headline on the Wise Blood tour. They were on Ozfest with Machine Head and Drain STH, if anybody remembers that band.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Tony Iommi.
Yeah, Tony
Yeah.
Iommi wound up marrying the singer. Um, so that was 1997, Tuxedo Junction in Danbury, Connecticut. That was my first ever gig. I remember being so excited and so overwhelmed. Like Tony said, walking in to the venue, you just feel like, holy shit, like what's about to happen? And we walk in, me and my buddy, and Woody Weatherman is like at the balcony upstairs from us, and he looks down and he's like, "Hey, you motherfuckers!" And we look up at him, we're like, "Holy shit, it's Woody Weatherman from COC!" And he goes, "Hey, man, you better watch the first band. They're about to come on. They're really good. Drain. You ever heard of them?" And I was like, "No, I had no idea. I thought this was just Machine Head and you guys." He goes, "Nah, dude, Drain's really great, man. They sound like Alice in Chains. Check them out." And these girls come out and and proceed to rock our fucking worlds, man. They were like a female Swedish Alice in Chains, and they were gorgeous too. Oh my god.
Yeah.
They did a couple songs, and then there started to be a chant in the room of "Show us your tits, show us your tits." So the singer comes up to the microphone. She goes, "You want to see him?" "Yeah." And she grabs her top and she starts to pull it down. "Yeah." And she hawks back spits right in the guy's face and goes, "Fuck you, this is Ace of Spades." And they started to do Ace of Spades from Motorhead. We lost our minds. It was incredible. Machine Head was incredible, and Corrosion of Conformity. Watching them play, I was so into them at that point, and I still am. They're one of my top favorite bands. But
What do you
that's
call that Swedish band?
Drain STH.
They were called Drain, and then there was another band called Drain, so they had to put STH, meaning they were from Stockholm.
Stockholm, yeah.
They were from Sweden, and they had to
Never
put that
heard
at
of them
the
before.
yeah. I don't know if they did much over in Europe. They were popular here for that one record, and the second record kind of bombed. It didn't really do
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, the second record
The
kind of
only
flopped.
metal, only like hard rock band I know with women back then was L7.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a little bit after that.
Yeah, it was what was it, around like 97 or so, something
Yeah,
like that.
97.
Yeah. I remember I interviewed them, or interviewed Anna, the bassist for a zine I was writing for, and
nice.
ended up hanging out on their bus with them and me. It was me and Reed Mullen hanging out with them that night. Just
that's
just
cool.
shooting the shit. Yeah.
Well, the magic.
That's fucking awesome.
I saw that was my second concert, was Corrosion of Conformity. I saw them on the Deliverance tour.
Oh yeah.
And I
Nice.
remember, I think it was Reed. He's the bassist, right? Reed Mullen.
The drummer.
Reed was the
Reed
drummer.
was the drummer.
Or the drummer. No, who's the bass? Mike Dean. That's it.
Mike
Mike
Dean.
Dean.
Yeah. So I remember, like, I forget who the band was opening. But I remember, like, you know, he was like standing there just like hanging out, like watching the band play. And I'm like, I saw him, I'm like, yeah. And he just
Yeah.
like looks around and he walks away. I'm like, I felt bad. I'm like, did I just scare him away or something?
Mike probably didn't even see you. He was probably zoned off. Just
Maybe,
Mike.
I don't know, but I felt like, did that just scare him away? I'm like, I kind of felt bad, but it was still a cool show.
So my second concert was a year later, and I saw Kiss on the Psycho Circus tour at Madison Square Garden.
Nice.
I was there. I was at that one.
That was such a good show. Go to that gig with a buddy of mine, get off the train, walk over to the Garden, and there's a whole line of people waiting to get in. There's dudes with kegs outside. Everybody's drinking. They're smoking fucking joints. So me and my buddy go, let's go to the bodega and grab a few beers. So we go to the bodega across the street and grab a few beers. And we come back and get online, and we crack our beers, and we're waiting for the doors to open. And all of a sudden, two cops walk up on us.
Undercover, right?
No, in full.
Because they used to hang out undercover down there all the time. I got approached so many times down there.
Were you still underage then?
I was 18 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And I was on probation for some dumb shit that I did. And I didn't tell my probation officer that I left Westchester County to go to Madison Square Garden to see Kiss, because I didn't want to tell her about it and have her go, no, you can't go to the Kiss show. So here's where I'm fucked. Cop walks up and he fucking looks at me and he goes, put that beer down. So I put it down on the ground. He kicks it right into my chest. Beer all down the fucking front of my chest. What's your fucking name, scumbag? And he's reading me the riot act. And I tell him my name, and I tell him where I live, and I tell him my phone number, and I tell him my mother's maiden name. And he's right in my grill. And he goes, why don't you empty your fucking pockets? So I empty my pockets. I got a pack of cigarettes in my pocket that's got a big bag of weed in it. Start handing all the shit over to him. I hand him my wallet. I hand him my cigarettes. I hand him the pack of cigarettes with the bag of weed in it. Hand him the lighter. He goes, is that it? And I said, no. And I reach in my jacket and I hand him a pack of rolling papers. What are you doing with rolling papers? I saved the cigarette butts at the end, and I fucking crushed that little bit out, and I roll another cigarette out.
That's
All
what we
right.
all expect.
He goes, so what are you here to see this fucking faggot band for tonight? And just I want to see Kiss. I'm a Kiss fan. I'm looking over at my buddy who's my dude that lived upstairs 10 years older than me. I'm like, please fucking help me. He's talking to the other cop who's the good cop. And the good cop's like, look, you got to just let him do this. He's got to do this all the time. Just let him fuck with your boy and everything's going to be all right. This dude's got me in tears. I think I'm going to jail. Finally, he hands me all my shit back and he goes, go inside and watch the show and get the fuck out of New York.
Oh man, jeez. What a fucking asshole.
Typical, for sure.
So they
Fully.
walk away, and my buddy goes, let's go back to the bodega and get more beers. So I said, dude, fuck you. He goes, come on, don't worry about it. You're fine. We go back to the bodega and get more beers. I stuff them in my pockets. We walk in. The show's incredible. But all night long, that fucking scenario was in the back of my head. That was my second concert of all time. And we left and we smoked 3 big bags of angel dust afterwards. That was a hell of a second show. So what do we got?
I've had
Your
problems with them.
Catholic mom should have come over here and try some of this shit with church burnings and stuff. Then your mom would have been got the fear into her. And I remember because our weakness, he smiled at that when he got that sentence for that murder, and that scene was reworked in the news for days because nobody has smiled at a death sentence or at a sentence before, like the closest we get to death sentence, which is like So that was for me that made quite an impression.
Definitely.
I bet.
I remember reading that Lords of Chaos book and being like, God damn, those dudes over in Norway are fucked up.
There's a documentary called "When Satan Rides the Media." You should, if you get English subtitles on it, you get a pretty good look at it stuff.
Yeah, I have to check that out.
Yeah. There was another one, another doc too. Yeah.
Or what?
Huh?
Well, I got to cut out of here soon, man. But yeah, I've enjoyed this. It's great.
Yeah.
I got one little
Like
quick part of like the finish, like my part of the
Yeah, man.
like story. I'll try to fly through it really fast. So it's like yeah, so I for one, Kiss and on Animalize and Queensryche on The Warning. That was one of my early shows I forgot to mention. And then I start going to like these underground shows. One is Anvil at the Rock 3. I'm like 13, 14 years old. I told the story really quick.
That's the one. That's the one you went to with
Cavaluzzi. Yeah, Cavaluzzi. His dad dropped us off, and we were little kids, and we watched most of the show, and Lips is up there with the dildo right as his father comes into the club looking for us, and Lips is up there playing the solo with the dildo, and we tried to hide behind people's, like we were so small back then, and we got like another song or two out of it, but then he finally found us, and we had to leave early, like how Kristian had to leave early for the Gore show. And one of the other underground shows I went to was at a local college. This band Militia played, and they were doing like Metallica songs, and they had their own originals, and they played with a band called Anti, and that was Chris Cafferty, who later goes on to Sabotage and Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And that was like a really early underground show that I went to, and I went to lots of local shows. And I like how a couple of these guys saying like you didn't really have friends. I was lucky to have a lot of metalhead friends. Metal was popular at the age that me and Tony were growing up, and had a lot of friends that had it. So every time you went to someone's house, you go through their collection and you get turned on to new stuff all the time. So I go by years. Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Judas Priest, and Iron Maiden. At one point, half my room was Judas Priest and Iron Maiden posters. Like they were the two big bands for me. And but I had like Sabbath and all these underground other bands are in the room. in my posters. But when thrash has already been around for a little while, but I'm still into like Iron Maiden and stuff. So I'm not there right as like thrash is like really taking off, and like Venom's already been out for a while and stuff. But then I slowly start hearing stuff like Anthrax and Metal Church and even Merciful Fate, and which was like really scary to me at first. But once I got into like what they were doing, that kind of opened the doors to everything. But I would hear Motorhead and the bands that were a little bit easier to get into, not the really extreme stuff, you know. But by the time I got into Slayer, everything changed, and I was fully into that. And then I didn't listen to any traditional metal for years. I didn't buy any hair metal stuff after 1984. Actually, after like the Van Halen album, 1984 is probably the last thing I bought because I found this heavier style music, and I start realizing I'm getting a little older, and I'm thinking like these people in Motley Crue look like idiots, Rat looks like idiots. Forget when Poison and Bon Jovi, so that was a little later. So I never liked that stuff. And then when they came, I was just like, oh, this is fucking really ridiculous. But so I get into the really heavy stuff, and as the latter, I always talk about of music and heavier, more extreme. I'm right there when Death comes out with Scream Bloody Gore, and Necrophagia comes out with Season of the Dead, and even like the early Macabre stuff. I was getting that, and I was there for that. So death metal is the one genre that I felt like I was there from the beginning, and I was anticipating every new release when those Napalm Death albums and Bolt Thrower and everything. I was buying them brand new, like the week they came out. Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, all those bands. We were like knowing bands about from the demos, and then you would get in the album when it finally came out, and it was like a big anticipation to it. So I just like that was the one genre that I kind of like stuck with forever. Like I went all through the 90s. Like people were like, "Oh, the grunge killed the metal." It didn't even affect my stuff because we our stuff was never that huge and popular. So, you know, we
Feel
were still going,
mainstream.
yeah, and it was concerts were still coming out, the albums were still coming out. It was almost like it didn't happen. Like, and it's funny because like when Pantera comes and kind of saves metal, like at the time, me and my friends were so immersed in death metal like that we thought Pantera was kind of like a joke. Like they were like thrash late come latelys or whatever. Like we were so beyond kind of thrash at the time. But I ended up getting a respect for them and getting into them. But it was like so much of that, like hardly any of the thrash bands kind of was like going through the whole death metal era and stuff. And then that also led into black metal right away. It was the more obscure, the more underground, the more insane shit we could find. We were into it. Grindcore. And I was into hardcore punk and stuff like that. So even like the real heavy industrial, I was like always up for something new if it was like heavy, but it was never going backwards. And it wasn't until almost like the year 2000 that I finally got so overloaded with all the death metal and extreme music that I finally started going backwards and trying to find the bands that I missed out on. And that's when I get into like Thin Lizzy and stuff like that. And every like I kind of then now I'm like liking everything again. And I had to go back and listen to those Iron Maiden albums that I missed, and a lot of stuff. I just ignored so much shit, like a lot some of those Dio albums and the Ozzy albums that were coming out. I just didn't care about any of that because I was so immersed in the underground death metal scene. But that's it. That's you know, now I'm all these years later, we never grow out of it, and the journey continues on. That's it.
Yeah, man.
That's right.
Yeah,
We all
totally.
keep finding new shit and keep getting into it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta
Yeah.
just pitch in. I remember when I got my first like compact stereo. I was thinking like I was 13 or 14. I remember the first four CDs I bought. This would be 94. So I would get Pantera with Carbon Driven, Megadeth with Euthanasia, Testament with Low, and Overkill with WFO. That was my
Wow.
first four like CDs. I knew what I was buying, not just getting it because the artwork looked cool.
Yeah.
That's
I
four
mean,
My
that's
first
kind of my
CD I
first.
ever bought was Pink Floyd The Wall. I already had it on vinyl, but Pink Floyd The Wall was the very first CD I bought when I got a CD player, even though I had it on vinyl for years. Like I wanted to have that on CD. That's the only one I can remember. I couldn't tell you what number two was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I bought
I
a
never heard.
I bought a CD player from a guy think around 1993. He was going to get one of those ones that hold like 100, and he sold me one of those ones with the 5-disc changer cartridge, and he gave me Kiss Destroyer with it. He says, I don't even like Kiss, and he just gave me the CD, and so that was my first CD. It came with the purchase, you know.
Nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What was the first CD you ever got, Kristian?
I was actually talking about that before when I was talking about my organ. It was like a hard 70s rock greatest hits.
Oh, so it was
right,
on CD.
Yeah, one of those like compilations. Yeah.
I got you. Cool.
I
Yeah,
did
so
that for my
yeah,
mom
when I
too.
started
That
listening,
was just a CD I got, like you, like with Rainbow with All Night Long, and like Derek and the Dominoes with Layla, and Black Betty with Ram Jam, and what's it called, Mother's Finest, and
Hell yeah, Mother's
and
Finest.
Meatloaf with Love at the Dashboard Light and stuff, and yeah, so it's pretty.
I just
Yeah.
realized that only me and Tony would like think of like our first CD purchase as being like a thing, like because you guys when you first started buying music with CDs, so
yeah,
it's like
No,
we both
man.
had 8-tracks and vinyl and cassettes and stuff. So
No,
Yeah.
man. All my first early music was cassette, and
Yeah, mine too.
I distinctly remember my very first CD that I ever got because it took forever for my parents to get me a CD player. They wanted to make sure I was serious about music. So I finally got a boombox, and the first CD I ever got was Stone Temple Pilots Core. And I played that up and down to death. I know that album backwards.
Did I feel?
So good. So good.
Well, I remember the first vinyl I got. I bought it second hand at. I was visiting my real mom, and it was Venom with From Hell to the Unknown.
The Unknown.
That's
Great
such a
compilation.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Yeah.
such a cool artwork. And it had
Gatefold with inverted
hell
cross
in
in the middle.
Yeah, it had hell in it,
Yeah.
so I gotta buy it. And you got the
I still don't have that, believe it or not. I never got that on vinyl.
I have it on vinyl and the other. I think I have it on cassette up here, actually.
Well, basically, it's like first LP is basically Welcome to Hell, and then you got the second vinyl, which is like, oh
There you
yes,
go.
no wonder I bought it on vinyl, huh?
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Have
that's
a
why I didn't
t-shirt.
get it.
T-shirt with
That's why
that.
yeah, I got the shirt of that too, but I never bought it because it had like songs that I already had and stuff. So like at the time, I didn't think it was
Sure,
something I
it's worth a
needed.
lot of money if you have the
I
original.
tell you a piece of trivia
Yeah.
about that. It's a Venom interview on that album. And it's one part in there when me and my friends were listening to it, and he says something, and he said he mumbles something in the interview. You can't understand what he says. And if you play it backwards, it says, I am the son of Satan.
Huh.
It's like he learned to say that backwards so he could put it in the interview.
There's a song in that compilation called Senile Decay.
It's not on
Decay.
any album.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's such a good
Mhm.
song.
Yep. Yeah, man. Cool stuff.
Sweet.
Oh,
So this was a fucking fun hang, man.
Yeah,
For
man.
a last minute, like, hey, let's scramble and put this together. This was cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Kristian,
Thank
did
you
you
very
say your
much.
first vinyl? Yeah, you told you about your vinyl. Jaymz, did you say your first vinyl? Like first, like full line of vinyl?
I think my first vinyl purchase, if I remember correctly, I was a kid, and me and my parents went to Crazy Eddie's. I don't know if any of you guys would remember that fucking
I
place.
remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The prices are insane.
Their prices are insane. I remember the commercial. So I remember going into Crazy Eddie's and getting to the vinyl section. And this is right before they were done, like right as they were closing up and liquidating everything. And I remember flipping through records and seeing Anthrax Fistful of Metal. And I really didn't know too much about Anthrax, but I thought it looked cool with the fist
Yeah.
coming through the guy's jaw. And I was like, this has got to be cool. Like, I think I should take this home. I think the record was like $4 or something. So I'm like, Ma, can I? She's like, yeah, whatever, get it. And I brought that home, and that was the first vinyl I ever owned. Was Anthrax
There's
Fistful.
something about that smell. That
Hmm?
vinyl smell back
Yeah.
then when you had that plastic that was full of toxics and stuff, when they didn't care about stuff. It just had that smell of dust and kind of heat being in a room for too long. And yeah.
I
It's
remember the
funny that you
cassettes
say
having
that.
a certain smell when you open up a cassette, a brand new cassette.
Yeah,
Especially
that
the
smell
clear
was
ones.
fun.
Yeah.
Remember
they
when
had a
clear
really
when clear cassettes first came out, and you get everything was going clear. When you open them, they smelled like, I don't know, they had this fresh smell about them. I don't know what it was. It was, yeah, tape cleaner is Rush tape cleaner. We were snorting it.
I still to this day, whenever I open a brand new CD, I gotta sniff the booklet.
Yeah, it's like that same smell from the cassette almost. Like the booklet had like a smell too. Yeah.
It kind of is, man. There's that smell to the CD booklet. It's almost like
James,
you're
Ted
James,
Nugent smells like body odor. No.
James, 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 think back when you first got Great Southern Tranquil, because that has paper booklet, not the laminated stuff we usually get. Great Southern Tranquil had that paper, thick paper. It'll spelled so different.
Yeah, I didn't have that on CD when I
Mine's pretty
first got it.
normal.
I had that on cassette. So the cassette had the paper booklet. I didn't have the CD that originally.
I'm
Okay,
looking.
okay.
You got a gloss cover, but the liner notes are all on paper.
Yeah, that's
Like you
a certain
say.
smell to it.
Oh, that's pretty
Smells
cool.
like pot. It's made out of hemp paper. I'm
Yeah.
just kidding.
Shit.
I never
I,
noticed that.
Oh, Tony.
you can
Yeah.
smoke
I
your.
also
You can
remember
smoke
when I
this.
got like into black metal. The first black metal album I was introduced was to A Blazing Northern Sky and to See Zephyrus with corpse paint. That kind
Yeah.
of and like on a tombstone and kind of a church that put Memory for Life to me. Like that opened my whole black metal gate. Was like the corpse
I
paint was like,
ordered. I special ordered Blazing Northern Sky and Soulside Journey,
oh
and they
nice.
came in, and when I listened to them, I couldn't believe that Soulside Journey was the first record and Blaze was the second. I was going, because Soulside sounds like a produced album, and then Blaze
Mhm.
sounds like it was recorded on a boombox at band practice.
Yeah.
And I was going, this must be mixed up. This one has to be the older one.
And also between those two albums, you got Goat Lord, which was supposed to be the second death metal album that they scrapped, and then they made the black metal album Blaze in Northern Sky, and this is within a year. So I mean, like it's because Goat Lord came out back in '96, like instrumental. So you get to hear what they really going. That's why they lose their best bass player too, because he wanted to play death metal. So the one that doesn't use the corpse paint on Soulside Journey, or the one that didn't.
Wow.
Cool.
And of course Mayhem and all that stuff with came afterwards. So it was like, but then I got like pretty sidelined because everything commercial I wasn't allowed to listen to. So I stayed kind of, I lost a lot of music those years, which Ralph talks about until like 2000s when I kind of fell off that train and had to retrack like what I have missed. So
Yeah.
2000, 2001, 2002 is a bad year for us all.
Nice.
Maybe not you, Tony, but because you're kind of like you're like a little more.
Those early Mayhem albums, they used to sprinkle some ashes from the burned churches. They would sprinkle the ashes in there so they would smell like burned churches when you opened up the CD.
What
You
am
didn't
I?
know that? You didn't know that?
What you're saying, Obi? A lot of the stuff, my favorite music is. I mean, I grew up on rock and roll. It just. I mean, bands that you didn't have, they weren't categorized as heavy metal. They were rock and roll bands. And a lot of the hair metal stuff when it was popular. Now I like the first wave of it in the 80s, but when I got into thrash and stuff in the later 80s, I never listened to albums by Warrant and stuff like that back then. And when I got so bored with music around new music around the early 2000s, I started going back to, you go to pawn shops and pick up all those 89, 88, 89, 90 hair metal records for $1. And I'd pick them up and check them out and go, wow, some of these are just like really good rock and roll records. It's just these dudes look like girls, you know. So, I mean, whatever, you know. But
looks like a
we're not
lady.
in all cases. A lot of them I had wrote it off. And a lot of it's good AOR too. And I like a lot of AOR stuff like Journey type stuff now. And a lot of those hair bands kind of fell into that category as well. Like Taiketo and stuff like that. That's just that stuff came out a little bit late. So you know, they didn't have radio hits with it, you know.
Yeah, there were some bands that were like late to the dance.
Yep.
Yeah, because thrash metal, to me, the first thrash metal songs I heard the Black Album because it was on TV and everybody listening to it, like everybody says. But really, the first thrash metal songs I heard would be Low Testament and Where It Hurts, Overkill, and is it Reckoning Day on Euthanasia?
Yes.
Yeah, those would be my first like thrash metal songs, and it's so much different than what everybody thinks is thrash metal, because Low Testament is a pretty heavy album for '94.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. They were almost they were trying to borderline, almost trying to go death metal the way Chuck changed his vocals on that album.
Yeah.
I mean, you compare that to the Ritual, which came before, which was like totally polished, like that was trying to be their Black Album or something.
Yeah. Very
Demoniac is when they really went death metal route.
Yeah.
And WFO with Overkill is so good. I mean, it's like with the highs and lows, and when they go from Carlitos Ways with like "You're up against it now, motherfucker," and like it starts with the bass, and it's such a good album. It's I mean, for me, I love WFO to this day. I think it's probably my second favorite after Under Influence.
Yeah, I love that album as well. WFO fucking rules.
Testament Low, they even went as far as to get Jaymz Murphy, who was like the hired gun for death metal bands at the time.
Yeah, and John Deddy on drums.
Yeah,
that's
right.
I thought it was John Deddy on that record? I was thinking it was Paul Bostoff, but maybe it was John. I can't remember.
Paul Bostoff felt on Divine Intervention with Slayer at that time.
Yeah, it would have been,
Yeah.
Not Bostoff. I was thinking about the Tempestas, who I'm thinking about. Yeah, but he may have been with
Tempesta, sorry. Tempesta, sorry.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, Tempesta was on that record.
Yeah, that's right. You're right.
So he was in Exodus too, I know. For a while.
Yeah. That's kind of a weird album. Low is kind of an interesting album. The artwork always fascinated me because it's
Dog Face Gods, man. What a song. Yeah.
That's a good tune. It's a fucking great record.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Anybody got anything else to add that you want to fucking talk about?
Well, my first D album was Strange Highways. Hello to Tracy G again.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Tracy G's the fucking man.
Yeah, my first D album. Me and Ralph talked about this because for me, that was my first D album. So when I heard Holy Diver first time, it was kind of like, this is kind of soft compared to what I was used to with Dio. But now, of course, I love it. So we come from two different sides. It's kind of always fun to discuss with Ralph because he's on this side, I'm on that side, and we kind of meet in the middle, like after discussing a bit.
That's an era that I totally skipped on. Even bands like Dio that I loved, worshipped growing up, I ignored. So now, like when I go back, they're like still fresh sort of albums because I didn't play the hell out of them back in the day. So I love going back to any of the stuff like that now that I didn't play out so much. The good albums.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Kristian, Ovi, Tony Dio, and Count Ralphus for saving the bacon tonight and coming up with this topic on the fucking fly. It's been a blast hanging out with you guys. I hope all you watching this have had a fun time checking this show out. please like and subscribe and repost and get all your friends to check us out.
Yeah, write in the comments. Write your first album. Write your first concert.
Please
Just
do.
write in the comments.
Yes. Yeah. Send comments and we will respond accordingly. All right. Good night. See ya next week. Thanks for watching the Rock Fantasy Files. Cheers, you motherfuckers.